In an episode of the hit sitcom How I Met Your Mother, the characters engaged in an argument about America's most popular food, and bread won out. Bread is ubiquitous around the world and takes many forms in many cultures, whether it be tortillas, naan, ciabatta, or the traditional white sandwich bread. But how does bread work? How does bread become, well, bread? There are two key features that make bread what it is: yeast and gluten. Yeast helps the bread rise. This little square packet of what basically looks like coarse sand opens the door to the amazing baked good that is bread. Yeast is a living organism, so it participates in cellular respiration. However, due to a lack of oxygen, anaerobic respiration takes place instead in the form of fermentation. Now, fermentation is usually associated with the making of alcoholic beverages such as beer, but in bread making, it's a little different. During the process of fermentation, the yeast converts sugar into carbon dioxide gas. The CO2 is then trapped within the dough, forming the little air bubbles that you see when you slice into a loaf of bread. Since yeast is alive, it can also be killed. Activating yeast occurs by rehydrating it in warm water, but if the water is too hot, it actually kills the yeast and then no fermentation occurs, meaning your bread doesn't rise. Next, the gluten. Gluten is a protein found in many grains such as wheat, barley, oats, and rye. It essentially provides the elasticity to bread, giving it a nice chewy texture. Gluten is formed when smaller gluten molecules are crossed to form a gluten network. This network is created when we knead the dough. The more you knead the dough, the chewier your bread will become. There are many methods to kneading dough, but as long as the gluten is built up, it doesn't matter which way it's done. The gluten network is actually what traps the carbon dioxide gas that is produced during fermentation, helping the dough rise. Finally, when you bake your bread in the oven, gluten, which is a protein, is denatured because of the high oven temperature. However, this coagulation of the gluten molecules, along with starch, stabilizes the final shape of the dough. Today I am making the traditional Jewish bread, challah, which is eaten every week on the Sabbath. It's an enriched dough that is similar to brioche and is presented as an intricate braid. An enriched dough has eggs and milk in addition to flour, water, yeast, and salt. The eggs and milk retard the yeast, so it takes more time to rise. Precise measurements of these ingredients are needed to ensure that the yeast won't be retarded completely and that the dough will still be able to rise, and also to ensure that the dough tastes correct. Traditionally, 2 loaves of challah are baked for Shabbat. The second loaf is supposed to commemorate the manna, or bread, that fell from the heavens during the Jewish Exodus. As you can see, although challah is a special bread for special occasions, it is prepared similarly to other types of bread. The dough must be kneaded and left to rise in order for the loaf to be a successful batch. Most breads need a second rise before baking so the dough can rest again after being shaped freeform or into a baking pan. But bread and baking in general means more to me than just being loosely connected to my religion and culture. I've dubbed myself a, quote, stress baker. During my first 3 years of high school, I would bake whenever I was stressed, especially around the month before finals. Baking in general has always been super relaxing to me, and I think it's because it represents the intersection of math and art, two things which I love. Baking is an exact science that requires precision, but in the end, everything, usually barring any mistakes, turns out beautifully. Though I have little to no artistic talent, being able to create something so beautiful and delicious using science really appeals to me. STEM majors and scientists often come off as harsh and cold on the outside. There's a misconception that they lack communication skills and basic human empathy. But this isn't true. Bread and baking breaks the stereotype that scientists can't be soft or caring. As I pursue a profession in health or science, I hope to remember this and connect with the part of me that loves baking, so I can remember to be kind, empathetic, and gracious. The making of bread requires precision, science, and a whole lot of patience, but in the end, it's ultimately worth the labor, and as a plus, your home will smell great.